Welcome to the We Level Up Treatment Center video series. In today's video we will discuss: what is survivor's guilt? Survivor guilt is a common experience following traumatic events in which others have died. Survivor guilt is a commonly used term in both clinical descriptions and lay language. It has been identified in various trauma-exposed populations, often linked to more severe post-traumatic mental health consequences. In the current version of the diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, survivor's guilt is one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Guilt is a self-conscious thinking and moral emotion characterized by negative self-evaluation and is a common post-traumatic experience. Survivor guilt typically arises in people exposed to or witnessed death and have stayed alive, leading to emotional distress and negative self-appraisal. Often, survivors feel responsible for the death or injury of others, even when they have no real power or influence in the situation. Although survivor guilt was initially applied to surviving tragedies such as the Holocaust or Hiroshima, the term was later used to refer to suffering guilt for surviving HIV+ during the AIDS epidemic. Survivor guilt during the AIDS epidemic was described as a perpetuating feeling of, "Why not me?" associated with difficulty recognizing and communicating emotional distress and a mediator of depression among this population. Since its initial application to the AIDS epidemic, survivor guilt has continued to be studied among a broad range of individuals diagnosed and treated for severe life-threatening medical conditions, including transplant survivors, cardiac arrest survivor guilt, and cancer survivor guilt. In-depth understanding of survivor's guilt symptoms. During a traumatic experience, the brain can sometimes not process the event due to its intensity. The high stress levels overwhelm the brain, and the hippocampus, responsible for chronicling memories, has difficulty differentiating if the event is in the past or the present. Flashbacks can develop when the brain struggles to store the memory in its proper place. As time passes, this processing issue can trigger mental and emotional problems and psychosomatic symptoms, which are physical ailments associated with increased stress and internal conflict. The extent and severity of a survivor's guilt vary between people. Survivor's guilt symptoms can be psychological and physical and often mimic PTSD. The most common psychological survivor guilt symptoms include the following: feelings of helplessness, flashbacks of the traumatic event, irritability, lack of motivation, mood swings and angry outbursts, obsessive thoughts about the event, suicidal thoughts. Common physical survivors' guilt symptoms can include the following: appetite changes, difficulty sleeping, headaches, nausea or stomachache, racing heart. Survivors' guilt symptoms can severely impact a person's life and functioning, suggesting that further research is needed to explore practical ways to help people deal with guilt. 2 types of survivor guilt definition. What's survivor's guilt? There are 2 major types of survivor's guilt, and it's not only a symptom of PTSD. Classic survivor guilt. It is commonly associated with accidents, natural disasters, or combat situations, where survivors question why they were spared while others perished. Existential survivor guilt. Existential survivor guilt is more abstract and relates to guilt about simply being alive when others are suffering or facing hardships. It can arise from a sense of unworthiness or a belief that one does not deserve happiness or success when others endure difficult circumstances. This type of survivor guilt is not necessarily tied to a specific event but rather a broader perspective on life and the human condition. Is survivor's guilt a disorder? It may be viewed as one of the cognitive and mood-related symptoms of PTSD, which include having distorted feelings of guilt and negative thoughts about oneself. However, people can experience survivor's guilt without having PTSD. They can also have PTSD without feeling survivor's guilt. Not everyone who experiences survivor guilt will meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. For example, they may contemplate a death of a loved one but not intrusively re-experience it. Nevertheless, it can cause depression and suicidal ideations. It is a valid form of suffering that warrants the development of effective interventions. Causes of survivor guilt syndrome. Although anyone can experience survivor guilt, many people heal from trauma without ever experiencing guilt. How do we define survivor's guilt? There's no definitive formula explaining why some people go on to feel guilty and others don't, but experts believe the following factors can play a role. Previous experience with trauma. If you've experienced trauma in childhood or at any other point in life, you could have a greater chance of experiencing survivor guilt. Personality factors. Personality factors suggest a link between survivor guilt and submissive behavior. Researchers believe this could have an evolutionary component. In other words, you might behave more submissively in social situations if you fear put-downs, threats, or different negative responses from peers. Believe your success or well-being keeps others from experiencing the same. Believe you're better off than others. Submissive behavior, then, effectively helps promote well-being for your social group. This could help explain why more socially submissive people often develop survivor guilt when a traumatic event affects group well-being. Self-esteem can also play a part. Since low self-esteem often involves fixed ideas about your abilities or sense of worth, it might trigger thoughts like, "I wonder why I survived. I feel undeserving of being here. If only I had acted differently, that wouldn't have happened. I couldn't prevent it, but I can't help but blame myself." Existing mental health symptoms. According to the DSM-5, underlying mental health concerns, including depression and anxiety, can increase the risk of guilt and other PTSD symptoms after trauma. Less social support. The DSM-5 notes that social support, both before and after trauma, can help protect against PTSD. Loneliness can worsen any emotional distress since feelings you can't share or express can quickly become overwhelming. When you don't have support from others, you might fixate on false beliefs about the trauma, including your sense of responsibility. You might even assume others blame you, just as you blame yourself. Unhelpful coping skills. People cope with the effects of trauma in various ways. Some of these strategies have less benefit than others. It's common to try to suppress or avoid trauma memories to escape unwanted emotions like guilt and sadness. You might also try to deny feelings of guilt entirely or give in to them by assigning and accepting blame you don't deserve. Without social support and coping mechanisms to address survivors' guilt, some individuals may resort to alcohol abuse or other substances to numb emotional distress and cope with anxiety or depression. Coping with survivors' guilt tips and self-care. To cope with survivors' guilt, it's crucial to acknowledge and accept your feelings without judgment and seek support from friends, family, or professionals to process your emotions. Engaging in self-care practices and focusing on your healing journey can also help alleviate the burden of survivors' guilt over time. Acknowledge your feelings and allow yourself to grieve. Seek support from friends, family, or support groups. Consider talking to a therapist or counselor about your experiences. Engage in self-care activities to nurture your emotional well-being. Challenge negative thoughts and practice self-compassion. Find ways to honor the memory of those you've lost. Focus on your growth and personal development. Set realistic expectations for yourself and avoid self-blame. Take things one step at a time, and be patient with yourself during the healing process. Remember that seeking help and leaning on others for support is okay. The We Level Up Florida Primary Mental Health Center stands ready to help. We Level Up Florida can inspire a support system through our mental health treatments to make you feel valuable. You can trust the treatment backed by leading recovery specialists practicing evidence-based therapy. We Level Up Florida Treatment Center offers therapy under one roof. Get comprehensive therapy for mind, body, and spirit. Your call is private and confidential, and there is never any obligation. That's it for today. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Like, share, and comment. We would love your feedback. Have a great day.